Power Hour. Excuse me. So hello and welcome to this evening's RLI Power Hour webinar titled Pearls of Leadership. My name is Dr. Nathan and I will be co-moderating this evening's session with Dr. Bob Pyatt as we are co-chairs for the ACR's RLI Power Hour webinar series. Next slide. Before we get started with the webinar, we do want to go over some logistical items with you so that you know how to better participate in this evening's event. So when you joined through the Zoom platform. At the very bottom of your Zoom window is the Zoom control panel, and we have an image of it here, which I'm putting my cursor on. There are two icons that we want to draw your attention to on the control panel. The first is the chat icon, which you can see right here. The chat icon you would use if you're having technical issues. So click on the chat icon. Up comes the chat window. You'll type in your technical concern, hit send, and then we will see it on our end, and our support staff will be reaching out to you to address the issue. The second icon is the Q&A icon. This icon you would use to ask questions of our faculty. You can submit questions at any point during the webinar. However, they will be collected and not addressed until we get to the Q&A session, which will occur at the very end. Next slide. One thing we do want to let you know about is that this is going to be a recorded webinar that will be available to our membership at a later date. And that also includes the Q&A session. So all participant questions will become part of that recording. So I'm now going to turn things over to Dr. Pyatt to introduce this evening's faculty. Dr. Pyatt.
Thank you, Jen. We are delighted to have three national leaders to speak this evening. Our first speaker will be Elizabeth Hawk, MD, MS, PhD. Dr. Hawk is a nuclear medicine physician and neuroradiologist. Her integrated MD and PhD training built a foundation to explore translational discoveries, understand the research process, and teach new emerging concepts. Following an undergraduate degree in molecular cell biology at UC Berkeley, Dr. Hawk completed a master's in medical radiation physics and a PhD in neuroscience at the Chicago Medical School. She then completed her medical doctorate residency and dual fellowship requirements at the University of Southern California and is now dual board certified in nuclear and molecular medicine, as well as in radiology. Currently, Dr. Hawk is an assistant professor for Stanford Hospital Nuclear Medicine Division, and she is also regional president for Matrix with Radiology Partners and the Director of Innovation Engagement. Our second speaker tonight, Amy Kotzinis, MD, FACR, is a professor in the Department of Radiology at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Dr. Kotzinis completed her training at Temple University in Philadelphia. Before then, she did her residency and fellowship subsequently in neuroradiology at Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia, and then she went on to the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. She is board certified in both neuroradiology and clinical informatics. Dr. Kotzinis chairs the Mayo Clinic Clinical Digital Imaging Committee, leading the team that oversees enterprise imaging and the Clinical Image Archive. Her team successfully executed and completed a major transition from 5 separate radiology information systems and 9 separate picture archiving and communications PACS systems into a single converged RIS PACS platform across the Mayo Clinic Radiology Enterprise in conjunction with the Plummer Project EHR implementation, which is the largest IT implementation in Mayo Clinic's history. In May of 2019, Dr. Kotzinis was elected to the ACR Radiology Board of Chancellors and now serves as the ACR Council Speaker. She was the 2016 recipient of the ASNR, ACR, and AAWR Women in Neuroradiology Leadership Award and attended her first Radiology Leadership Institute meeting that fall. Our final speaker tonight, Dr. Sanjay Shetty, MD, MBA, FACR, is president of Steward Healthcare System, where he leads day-to-day operations and strategy for Steward Healthcare's integrated health system in the United States, which includes 39 hospitals, a large multi-specialty medical group of 2,500 providers, and Steward's nation-leading accountable care organization. Steward is the largest privately held, physician-owned and run healthcare system in the United States. Prior to being named in this role in March of 2021, Dr. Shetty most recently served as president of Stewart's South region, which includes 12 hospitals and associated business lines in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Florida. Throughout his 11-year tenure at Stewart, Dr. Shetty also has held the roles of president of the Stewart Medical Group and president of Stewart Healthcare Network, as well as vice president of radiology, bringing a breadth of knowledge to this national role to benefit Stewart's patients, providers, and staff. A graduate of Harvard College, where he got a degree in biochemical sciences, summa cum laude. He then went on to get his MD degree from Harvard Medical School and his MBA from the Wharton School. Dr. Shetty has held teaching positions at the Harvard Medical School, as well as at Tufts University School of Medicine, and he has authored numerous articles, reviews, and op-eds as a practicing radiologist, actively involved in state and national level issues with the American College of Radiology. And he has also served as a former president of the Massachusetts Radiological Society and as a member of the ACR Council Steering Committee. Sanjay lives in Dallas with his wife and children, is active in many philanthropic endeavors, currently serving as a trustee for the Phillips Exeter Academy. It's a great pleasure to have these three incredible leaders to speak to you tonight. And we will now go to our first speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Hawk. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining you this evening and to be sharing the stage with such inspiring and phenomenal friends and colleagues. I'm deeply grateful to the ACR and the RLI for this opportunity and really excited to speak with all of you tonight. Get started with a few brief slides, but hopefully this is really just the start of our conversation. What I'm most looking forward to is the Q&A portion of our session tonight. So with that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about creative career paths and how to build a strong personal professional brand. I do split my roles, and I live in both the academic and the private practice world. As it was said in my introduction, I live in academia with Stanford University in the nuclear medicine department, but I also sit heavily rooted in the private practice world with Matrix at Radiology Partners. So no specific disclosures for tonight, no perceived direct conflicts of interest. I am employed by Radiology Partners. I do make a note of that. And I do have several industry engagements, but none of which will be discussed tonight during this lecture. I always add this slide to all of my lectures. It wouldn't be a lecture on brand building in the digital world if I didn't make a point of saying this. I encourage everyone to say this when they give a talk, when they want to engage their digital online audience. You do have my permission to take pictures of the contents and share widely, but please make sure to tag the RLI. And if you'd like to tweet at me, that's my handle. So what are we going to cover over the next 10 minutes or so? I'd like to identify ways to use social media platforms for networking opportunities and how to build and maintain your personal brand. But with that, let's first kind of dive into the variety of professional paths and why you would even want to have a strong personal professional brand. So I think first and foremost, it's important to remember that practicing radiology, it's not binary, right? Our images are 256 shades of gray, so are our practices. And there are so many different possibilities. You could be 100% clinical and live in the private practice or the academic world. You could be 100% research. Myself with a PhD background, that was certainly an option for me. You could leave patient care altogether and live 100% in industry, or even leave clinical care and research behind and really focus on your administrative duties and focus on your leadership. But the most important thing to remember is you don't need to go down any one of those paths solitary. Myself, I live in both private and academic. I do some research actively. I have a number of different industry engagements, and I do a lot of leadership work. So I kind of live in all of those worlds at the same time. And that's why it's so important to build a strong professional brand. So really, you need to consider the possibilities of varying work over the course of the workday, the work week, or even your career. You may want to start off heavily rooted in patient care, maybe in an academic environment. But as you learn more about the opportunities, you may transition into different roles and different opportunities. The most important thing, though, is to consider what it takes to reach those goals and to build that strong pipeline of opportunities moving forward, gathering those experiences and building what I like to call brand equity as you move forward into sort of the range of possibilities at each stage of your career. So how do you build your pipeline, right? Regardless of your chosen path, you need to map out the steps to get from your current professional brand to your desired career peak. That may be taking on different sort of leadership roles, taking on different volunteer opportunities, progressing in a way that allows you to gain more and more experience and credibility as you get to sort of the higher plateau where you want your career to go. But the most important thing is, even though you may have that pathway, that ladder, that map in your hand, you have to maintain the ability to be flexible, to be inspired by the different people that you encounter, and to grow and embrace the unexpected. Certainly, myself 5 years ago would have looked at who I am today and really said, wow, I had no idea that was possible, or I had no idea or saw that coming. And I would not have projected or predicted that, or even known that that was a possibility to map out. So it's a really good idea to plan ahead, but also you kind of need to be up for the adventure if you really want to excel and find out where your potential lies. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, and that there are lots of different equity concerns and things we can bring into the conversation. This was from a lecture that I just gave at the RSNA for the AAWR. One of the things that I would love to highlight is that the new flexibility in work arrangements and the variety of professional opportunities across different platforms really has helped the advancement of women and underrepresented minority across radiology. If anyone has interest in this, I would love to talk more about this during the Q&A portion of our program tonight. So we know that there are a lot of possibilities, and we really want to get there, and we really want to map out a fantastic career path and explore all these exciting worlds. But the question is, how do you leverage different social media platforms to build that strong professional brand and to really empower yourself to be able to do that? Now, this may be the first and only social media talk you ever hear that isn't going to talk about the social media platforms. I'm not going to delve into Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and Instagram. Everyone sort of is familiar with those. What I'd really like to talk about is the strategy behind how you approach those digital media platforms. And then you can sort of explore which platform fits best for you and apply this strategy across the different platforms. So first of all, what is a brand? We talk about brand all the time. It's loosely thrown all over all of our vocabulary, but very few of us actually stop to ponder about what it is. A brand, really simply, if you look at the dictionary definition, is just a type of product manufactured by a particular company under a particular name. Really, it takes its ancient roots in identifying livestock as a mark burned on the livestock with a branding iron. And it's thought to have originated all the way back BC times in ancient Egypt. And branding was used to differentiate one person's cattle by another's by a means of a distinctive symbol, right? That was the brand. But this concept of brand really evolved across widely different trade routes across different ancient civilizations. And it not only began to mark ownership and origin, but also more of a guarantee of quality and of authenticity. And I think that's where the importance of the word brand comes into play. And really, there's been huge impact on clinical and business landscapes. When you fast forward to today, the concept of brand has evolved, but it still very much retains its essence and its roots of where it came from. The most important thing, though, is that I want to talk about shifting from goods and commodity like cattle and trade goods to that of an individual. And I really love this definition of personal brand from the literature that describes it as a set of characteristics of an individual, attributes, values, beliefs that are rendered into a differentiated narrative and imagery with the intent of establishing a competitive advantage in the minds of your target audience. And that's what you're really trying to do. You're trying to establish your own personal professional brand to give yourself that competitive advantage to really take advantage of all the career opportunities in all of these different worlds. So in the past, the brand of each institution of the product was critical, right? And the focus fell mainly on the concept of employee branding, right? I belong to X university or Y private practice, and this is the set of characteristics that define me because I belong to them. And that's still very much important. But there's really a new era that's emerged in which physicians themselves are developing powerful personal brands. Right? My social media brand, Hawk Imaging, is sort of independent of the different institutions that I belong to. And it's one that I really put a lot of work into to grow brand equity so that I have personal professional advancement opportunities. So how do you do that? It all sounds like a lot. It sounds like a big bite to chew. And you think about how am I going to build a personal professional brand if I'm only getting started? Or even if I'm in my mid-career and want to sort of navigate a new career path in one of these other worlds. I love to break it down into 6 key steps. And when I lecture this for the RLI Leadership Essentials course, this is an entire hour lecture. But basically the 6 key steps are: first, just be present, just show up. What does that mean? Just make an account on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever you're going to use. 2, establish consistency and predictability. So don't just show up, but show up every day and represent yourself in the same reliable way so that people get a sense of you and who you are. I love to do an exercise where I put up tweets from 5 key radiology leaders, remove their name, their picture, and their handle, and people can still identify who they are just by the way they're showing up. The next is to earn trust from your community. So instead of just showing up, instead of just being consistent, now people really trust the words that you're saying, and they know what to expect from you every time you're showing up into a digital platform. After you've gained everyone's trust, then you can become a valued member of the community. Now, instead of just showing up to a tweet chat, they're asking you to moderate the tweet chat, or they're saying, hey, we don't want to have this online presence unless Dr. X is a part of it because they're a valued member of our community. Now, once you can become valued, then you can sort of make this jump, which is the hardest jump for people to make, and that's to become irreplaceable. That's, hey, we really want to have this tweet chat. We want Dr. X to moderate it. And if we can't get Dr. X, we'll reschedule it to a different day because that doctor is irreplaceable to us. If you can become irreplaceable in your digital community and with your brand presence, that's when you really have the power to drive change and to drive transformative change across patient-centered care inside of radiology and certainly in the larger house of medicine. So how do you build, how do you maintain, and how do you grow? Once your brand experience is established, once you have that reliable, trusted, valued presence across your social media platforms, then it's paramount to protect what I call that brand equity, right? You can squander trust and reliability with a few horrible things very quickly. So you need to really be very precious with your brand presence and very purposeful about the content that you put out. And I love this quote because it reminds us as physicians that brands don't live inside the walls of a company, right? We're not members of a company, we're members of a practice. It lives inside the hearts and the minds of our patients, of the employees, of the team that we work with, and of our community. And our brand as physicians is very emotionally charged, more so than any other personal professional brand, because for our patients, our brand is in their hands because their life is in our hands. And so I think it's very special, very important, and something that should be highly respected, the art of developing a personal professional brand as a physician. It carries a lot of power, but of course it always carries a lot of responsibility. And once you can do that, you can drive meaningful change as a physician across social media platforms. So once trust is earned, value is established, and your brand essentially becomes irreplaceable, now you sit in the position of power to lead change. And the most successful professional brands become trusted and valuable far beyond the confines of their small professional community, beyond radiology, beyond medicine, and even across different community lines and into the global community. And when we cross these barriers and we connect with a larger interdisciplinary team and build a larger, more diverse community of thought leaders, that's when truly impactful change can occur on a national or even on a global scale. So in closing, I just want to remind you that the first steps, the easiest steps, are just as simple as joining the conversation. When you join, be authentic, consistent, reliable, earn trust, and grow value. And then with time, your brand will become a valuable asset and will grow equity. Always listen, learn, react, and evolve to maintain relevance. You can evolve your brand, stay true to who you are, and then you can continue to be an impactful force in your community and beyond, and really be in a position to explore all of this variety of different career and professional opportunities ahead of you. References there for anyone that wants to read further, and I look forward to speaking with everyone after my other 2 esteemed colleagues have a chance. Thank you.
I would like to thank Dr. Nathan and Dr. Pyatt for inviting me to speak with you tonight. And I'm honored to be on the panel with Dr. Hawk and Dr. Shetty. I'm going to talk about my personal strategic plan, and I'm going to take you back about 10 years. I was approaching mid-career at that point in time, and let me go back. I attended RSNA that year. And when I attended RSNA, I went to a luncheon sponsored by AAWR, and the featured speaker at that particular luncheon was Dr. Mary Mahoney, who you may recognize as the most recent president of RSNA. She presided over a fantastic meeting last week. And Dr. Mahoney talked about her career. She talked about how she advanced through the academic ranks to become a full professor. She talked about becoming a department chair at the University of Cincinnati, and about her journey to be involved with RSNA as well, which, as we know, culminated in her presidency this past year. And I came away from that talk feeling inspired to do a little bit more myself. I was, as I said, approaching my mid-career. I was an assistant professor. I was involved in some projects at Mayo Clinic related to IT and informatics, but I really wanted to do more. I wanted to be a role model and champion for women in radiology, but specifically in neuroradiology, which is a more male-dominated specialty, and particularly in imaging informatics, which is heavily male-dominated. And I really wanted to influence the future of medicine. So I started at that point in time to think about something that I now consider a personal strategic plan. The genesis of that started at that time where I really looked at the state of my career and realized that I wanted to do more. And so I started to define my purpose. What did I want to do to achieve more in my career? And from that, I started to develop an action plan, similar to what Dr. Hawk mentioned as her map. With the action plan, I started to identify what are the skills that I need to acquire in order to achieve the things that I want to achieve. What are the experiences that I need to have? If I wanted a leadership role in informatics at Mayo Clinic, most of the leadership roles require you to be an associate professor or higher. So achieving academic rank was an important thing. If I wanted to influence medicine on a larger scale and radiology on a larger scale, getting involved with the American College of Radiology was important. So getting involved in my state chapter was something that I needed to do as a first step. So once you have your action plan, I think the next thing that you want to do is really communicate it to a lot of people. Communicate it to your spouse, communicate it to your colleagues, communicate it to your friends. And part of the reason for communicating to these other folks in your life is that they will really help to keep you accountable to achieving all of those steps in your plan and making sure that you are making progress towards your goals. And then I think not the last step, but the step that you take at least once a year. In my case, I like to do this at the beginning of the year, but maybe you want to do it at the beginning of the academic year or around your birthday. Assess the progress that you've made. What have you accomplished over the last year? Have you made steps along your action plan to get towards those goals that you've set for yourself? Maybe you've achieved some of your goals, and maybe it's time to give yourself some new goals that you can then put back into your action plan and go through the process again for the coming year. I think many of us think of the strategic plan as something that we use for our organizations and for maybe the teams that we lead. But I think having a personal strategic plan can also help you be a little bit more focused in those activities. So when you're leading your team, having your own personal strategic plan will help you to really prioritize what you need to do as part of the team, or as the leader of the team, so that you're really clear on what activities you can commit to and what kinds of things you need to delegate. So I think the saying that we hear is saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else. When you have a personal strategic plan, when you have clearly outlined what your goals and objectives are, then you have real clarity on what are those things that you should be saying yes to and finding a way to fit into your life. And what are those things that really don't fit with that plan? What are those things that aren't going to help you achieve your bigger goals? And those are the things that you're probably going to want to say no to. And that, I think, helps give you the clarity to say no, and to say no simply and in a straightforward manner to whomever asked you to do whatever it is that they wanted to do. And will help you with your time management, because you're only going to be saying yes to those things that really matter to you. So I think it's important when you've identified something that doesn't fit with your plan, that you do say no in a very simple, straightforward way. But I think that sometimes what I hear when I ask other people to do things is not so much a no as a not right now. And what do I mean by a not right now? What I mean by a not right now is, well, maybe I don't have the bandwidth right now to fit something like that in, but if it was an opportunity that I could do in a month or a year from now, then I might have the bandwidth. So it's an opportunity with whomever's asked you to do this thing to maybe negotiate. Is this something that I can do a little further down the road when it fits better into my schedule? Sometimes a not right now means I don't think I have the right skills, or I don't think I have the right experience. So saying not right now, I don't think I'm experienced enough, may allow the person who asked you, because obviously they thought you were experienced enough, or they wouldn't have asked you, to say, no, you really do have the right skills, or here are your strengths. And yes, you may have a few weaknesses, but we can work on those. And it might allow you to get to a point where you can actually say yes to something that you're really interested in doing. And sometimes a not right now will also allow you to go back to your plan and say, okay, I don't have the right skills right now, but I'm going to put those into my action plan. So the next time an opportunity like this comes along, I'm going to be prepared to say yes. So I think that the personal strategic plan really helps you navigate the yes and the no, and particularly the not right now. And then I'll wrap up by saying that sometimes a no really is a no. Sometimes it doesn't fit with what your strategic goals are. Sometimes you just don't have the bandwidth to do it. And sometimes you just have to tell whoever has asked you to do this thing that, no, I just cannot do it. And I think this is a time when you can look at your networks, look at those individuals that you have mentored, look towards your junior colleagues or someone who's up and coming in your organization. And who do you know in your network that is interested in doing something like this, that has the right skills? And you can say, no, I can't do this, but I have the perfect person for you. And you can really pay it forward so that those individuals can have a good start on their personal strategic plan and meet some of their action items moving towards their larger goals. So I look forward to your questions as well, and I will turn it over to Dr. Shetty.
Hi, everyone. Hold on one sec. I apologize. Are you able to see my screen? Perfect. All right. Everyone, thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Dr. Nathan, Dr. Pyatt, for having me. Thanks to my co-panelists. I just learned a ton, so I really appreciate their words. I'm going to be just filling in with a few more thoughts in terms of leadership and some ideas I wanted to share. This is always really important to me and special because I will say that the ACR and the RLI are a really big part of the journey that I took and the reason that I'm sort of in the position that I'm in. You heard a little bit about my background already, and I just shared this slide to say that it definitely was not a straight line. I wish I could say I was as strategic as Amy described in terms of having come up with a strategic plan in advance. But my journey's been a little bit back and forth, and I'll just sort of quickly recap that I started off as a radiology resident at MGH. During my first academic job, I decided because of my involvement with the ACR and because of my involvement with the RFS, that I wanted to get my MBA. So at the same time as I was doing my first job, I decided to go and get my MBA at an executive program. I then decided, even though when I went into the MBA, that I absolutely positively was going to be an academic radiologist, maybe a chairman one day, that I didn't want to do that anymore. And I pivoted completely, left medicine entirely, and went to work for Bain & Company for several years, doing healthcare strategy consulting and private equity consulting. I missed the radiology, I missed the clinical, so I ended up coming back into the clinical world by joining what was then Caritas Christi, soon to become Steward Healthcare, in 2010, originally as a chairman of radiology at one of the hospitals. My job at Steward has evolved quite a bit, as you heard a little bit about, starting sort of as a mix between the clinical and the business, evolving more recently to really be a business position, most recently now as president of Steward Healthcare System. You heard a little bit about that role as well. Steward is the largest privately held physician-led healthcare system in the country. I manage 39 hospitals, the medical group, the ACO, overall about $7 billion in revenue, about 49,000 employees in the company at the present time. But it's been this really interesting journey. And I will tell you that I would never have predicted from the beginning what came at the end, but there are definitely some lessons I've learned along the way. And that's a couple of what I wanted to share with you. And this is based loosely on a talk I've actually given in the past at various RFS sessions, because of sort of things that people always ask me and that I thought I would share. And I think complements a lot what we've heard about earlier tonight. The first is for any of you who are sort of at various points along your leadership journey, is to continue to sort of stick your toe in the water and really understand what options there are available to you. I think this ties really well to what Amy mentioned is with regards to a strategic plan. I think it's hard to know what is out there with respect to leadership. Hey, could I be interested in something in academic leadership? Could I be interested in private practice leadership? Could I be interested in something completely outside the medical industry? One of the ways in which you have to do that is to sort of see what's on the other side of the fence and to really understand it. This is sort of along the lines of say yes when offered opportunities, but also go out and search out those opportunities. Volunteer for the committee that might give you a taste of leadership. Volunteer for that opportunity to run a small project, and really dip your toe into the water to understand if that's a path that might be of interest to you. The second is to network. And I always used to think of networking as sort of a schmoozy bad word. I will tell you, networking is not that at all. In my experience, networking actually is incredibly powerful because it's an opportunity for you to reach out to others in the field, in other tangential areas, in completely unrelated areas, to understand what it is that they're doing, to understand maybe how they might be helpful to you down the road, even if they're not going to be helpful to you, to become an advisor. I will tell you that along the way, I have met people through just sort of random outreaches and some not so random outreaches that have really become sort of an informal board of advisors. People that I still reach out to this very day that I say, hey, I'm thinking about a new opportunity. I'm thinking about something that I'm struggling with at my job. And so those networking initial interactions become that board of advisors that will serve you well for years to come. So definitely think about the ways in which an organization like the ACR or other of the professional organizations, or even sort of less formal ways in your community or otherwise, could be that group of folks that start out as the networking opportunity, but eventually evolve into your board of advisors. The third idea is sort of what you saw illustrated on the slide before, which is your journey will not be a straight line. In fact, it would probably be pretty boring if it was. So a big part of sticking your toe in the water and networking is to realize that there are many different opportunities out there for you to consider and to contemplate as you embark on your journey in leadership. And don't expect that the next role that you take is really the last job. I always tell people that when you're taking the next job, don't just think about that next opportunity, but think about the opportunity after that. And expect that it's probably not going to be a straight line. So like I said, every step along the journey, I never expected when I took my role as a chairman of radiology at one hospital that I would eventually be asked to run an ACO, eventually from there asked to be lead an entire healthcare system. But it certainly set myself up on that journey along the way, recognizing that in retrospect, it wasn't in any way a straight line. The next quick pearl that I'll share that I think many of you already know, it sort of goes without saying, but it's amazing how many people I see that don't follow this very simple advice, is to listen, especially when you're embarking on a new role. I can tell you that along the way, I've taken on new responsibilities. I've come charging in with all sorts of ideas that I had as sort of thinking about it in the abstract. But the most important thing I've ever done is to stop and to listen in every new role that I've taken. Understand what the issues really are, understand who the stakeholders are, understand how you can be most helpful and how you're going to facilitate getting to a solution. I would say that thoughtful listening is probably the most important piece of what you can do to ultimately be successful in any new responsibility that you take on. And finally, and this is probably the most important piece of the advice that I can share, and look forward to sharing more as we get through the talks, is to think about your story. So this is almost the reverse of what Dr. Katsinas mentioned in terms of thinking about this in advance. My advice is to constantly be thinking about your story in retrospect, right? What story are you putting together that as you're thinking about that next opportunity, that next role, all fit together as if it made perfect sense. All of those pieces absolutely make sense for why I'm here talking to you about this particular responsibility. To be more explicit, I will tell you that when I was in academic medicine for a short period at the very beginning of my career, I never would have thought that that experience would have been relevant as I applied to Bain & Company to do healthcare strategy and private equity consulting. But as I began to think about what it was that I did as an academic radiologist, it was teaching, it was speaking, it was writing, it was putting together research papers and really able to articulate an argument. All of those were things that, as in a completely different context, were very important as a consultant, working with healthcare leaders across different industries to be able to tell a story, to be able to develop data to support an argument, and ultimately to be able to present that argument in a cohesive and compelling way. And I actually pitched that story to Bain & Company when they said, well, what the heck are you doing here? You may have an MBA, but that's just a piece of paper. What are you really doing here? And it was being able to take those skills that I developed, even without thinking in advance that those were going to be useful, and then pitching them and developing into a story that would be very useful in the next role that I took. That has been a set of things, that story that has developed behind me, that has been incredibly useful as I think about what comes next. And it's a piece of advice that I share with a lot of folks as they're thinking about different roles and opportunities that they might pursue, which is, what is your story? How are you going to position yourself from being a clinical radiologist to a radiologist leader? How are you going to position yourself from being a radiologist leader to a physician leader? How are you going to position yourself from being a physician leader to just a leader, an owner of a business, an owner of a P&L, a profit loss statement, someone who can really manage the business, not just as a medical advisor, but truly as a business leader? Those are all the different parts of that story that you want to, along the way, be dipping your toe in the water, networking, recognizing that the path is not going to be a straight line, listening, and ultimately putting together into a cohesive story that will help you sell yourself into that next role as you're thinking about different steps in your journey. I think some of the things that I found to be particularly difficult along the way were items that sort of changed when you went from being an individual contributor as an individual radiologist to ultimately taking on increasing levels of responsibility and ultimately leadership. The first is to recognize very quickly where you have the ultimate decision-making ability. Often that comes later in your career, to where you just have influence. And I will tell you that influence, although can be frustrating at first, and especially when you're early in your career and you realize it's all influence that you have, can actually be really powerful if deployed correctly, and if you're recognizing who all the stakeholders are that you have to influence in order to drive the change that you're trying to get to. Those are the beginnings of the story that you're going to tell, right? I may not have had the power to make this change, but I worked all the different people in the room to ultimately make X change. And by doing that, I was able to drive this result. That's the beginning of my leadership journey. I think it's really important along the way as you're managing those stakeholders to really find a way to take an honest temperature of how you're doing, right? Trying to get honest feedback. I think in medicine, we're terrible at giving really good feedback. It starts from medical school and sort of continues for the rest of our career. The only folks who get really honest feedback are the ones who make the really big mistakes. But along the way, if you can find those trusted mentors and trusted folks along the way who can give you an honest temperature of how you're doing, that feedback can really be transformative in how you approach different problems. And finally, it's really trying to understand how you're evolving on your path as a leader. And this is something I struggle to this day. I, by my nature, am an operator. I want to fix things. I want to get into the details. I want to be able to understand what's going on and fix them at the very ground level. Ultimately, though, every one of us will evolve to be more and more of a leader, where you have to be able to trust other people to get things done, to be able to ask the right questions, and to provide them with the vision and the expertise that will help them drive to their better results. And so it's recognizing as you move up that ladder, how you can change from being sort of that in the weeds operator to a true leader. Finally, I'll present just a little counterpoint slightly to the idea of social media. I will say that in my position now, I have almost zero control over my own social media presence. I'm a representative of the company in almost everything that I do. It's my LinkedIn and others are almost completely managed by the company because everything that I say is being scrutinized for what is the company thinking, what is the group thinking, what is, in another context might be what is the department thinking, what is the hospital thinking, what is the system thinking. So really important that especially as you're early on in your career that you be thoughtful. A lot of this stuff, as you know, lives forever. Always think about the long-term implications of what you're posting. I think a lot of the advice you heard earlier about building a brand, absolutely on point, because that brand will outlive the individual post. And you want to make sure that whatever you're putting out there is absolutely something that you could live with and be happy with down the road. But realize that more and more as you move up the ladder, you're going to be representing not just yourself, but your company, your team, and many other stakeholders and institutions that are going to have a really vested interest in what it is that you say. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to share with the group, sort of to complement what had been said before. But I really do look forward to your questions and engaging with the other panelists about what your questions are from this webinar. So thank you so much for the time.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank our excellent panel today, our excellent speakers for their expertise, insight, and their personal journeys that can help us become better leaders. We're now going to move on to the Q&A session. We do have a few questions that have already come in. Let me go ahead and get started here. So the first question is, how do you schedule and maintain practice management time? Would any of our faculty like to take a stab at this one?
Well, I can take a stab. I mean, I schedule everything on my calendar. Basically, I schedule all of my clinical activities. I schedule all of my personal activities. I schedule all of my ACR activities. Putting it on the calendar helps me see, where I'm going to have free time for my personal life and where I don't. And if something comes up that I need to do, I can shuffle things around to accommodate that. But I know where that time is going. And I've built in some capacity to deal with things that come up that are unexpected. But I found that just scheduling everything so that I'm really aware of how much time I'm spending has helped me to focus where I spend my time.
I can also chime in, some of the best advice that I got from some of my really strong female mentors in the AWR was about learning to juggle and juggling different balls and understanding that not all balls are made from the same material, that some balls are made of rubber and some balls are made of glass. And it's important to know which balls are made of rubber, and you can allow them to drop and they will bounce back. And some balls are made of glass, and those balls are very precious and you can't allow those to drop. So when you have unexpected challenging and you're scheduling and you're trying to balance different things, you have to really know what can afford to be dropped and what can bounce back and be picked right back up where you left off, and which things you can't drop because they're made of glass. And having that perspective and that understanding, I think will help for unexpected time management issues.
Any other comments?
I would just, I mean, I think the comments were straight dead on. I would say part of this also is knowing when to say no to a meeting that isn't actually worth your time. I think that often is something that is very easy to say, well, the invite came to my calendar, so I better go. It's really understanding which ones are appropriate, which ones you can say no to. I know when I was balancing the clinical and the administrative, it was exactly as Amy said, it was scheduling it, planning ahead. Hey, today's the day I got to show up early to kind of crank the list a little bit because I know I'm going to be gone from 8 to 9, or I got to prep for that conference. And so, getting that out ahead of time, and then recognizing that sometimes, you know what, clinical is just going to take over and you're going to, sorry guys, can't make it today. I'll catch up with you after, and blocking that out for when you need to.
Perfect. All right, our next question is for mid-career faculty who want to grow into leadership roles. How do they become visible to a department or hospital leadership?
I could take that one, since I started my presentation by saying that I was mid-career, essentially when I started doing a lot of what I do today. I think it's volunteer. Volunteer for the things that other people don't want to do. Because if you take those difficult tasks on and do a good job with them, then they're going to give you, a better role, a more advanced role further down the line. So that's how I would suggest you start.
Yeah. And I would add to that, just try to articulate the goal that you have, right? I mean, I think that is the discussion with your department chair, with the hospital president, with the chief medical officer, whatever direction you are interested in going in. It's, I want to learn more about what you do. How can I be useful to you? Is there a committee that you could use me on, right? How do you get your foot in the door to then be a good contributor who then gets recognized? Hey, you know what? We should get that person for this additional responsibility. But I think the key is figuring out what it is that seems interesting, maybe using that opportunity to dip your toe in the water and figure out if you like it. And then, as Amy said, if you do a good job, people will pull you in. But a lot of the conversations I have are from that, hey, I'm interested in this direction, chief medical officer, I want to be a department chair, whatever. And that's the beginning of that. Okay, let's plot this out together.
I think in today's pandemic, post-pandemic, still in the pandemic world, we also need to master new ways of connecting and being visible. Traditionally, to be visible, to be promoted, you had to be there in person and really showing up, literally showing up. But now we're transitioning into a different world where we're doing things over Zoom and different ways of communication. And I think really stopping to be very purposeful about your executive presence over Zoom, over email, over other platforms of communication is really important, so that you gain that visibility and you're able to advocate for yourself, to get a good mentor, to get a good sponsor, and to climb that ladder. And I think a lot of mid-career people that are sort of making that transition from being really present in person to now learning to build that executive presence online over Zoom and over other platforms need to take the time to be very purposeful about that, about crafting their presence so that they can have the visibility to gain that upward momentum.
Okay, great. Our next question is, how do you build camaraderie and foster teamwork? Any suggestions?
So I'll jump in. I mean, I think for me, among my direct reports, it's frequent check-ins, it's understanding really what their goals are, and then among the team, it's pulling them together, right, and pulling them out of the office. That for me is the most effective way to do it. Whenever I do a hospital visit, it's, we're going to spend all day cranking through in the conference room, but then I'm taking you out to dinner at the end. And that, frankly, it's, people remember that, people recognize that you're taking time that isn't just completely work focused in order to invest in them as individuals and as people. And I think that certainly also brings the team together to say, wow, we're all here together and we're all in it as a group.
I think also having high emotional intelligence as a leader, leading with empathy, really trying to stay in tune with your people as whole people, as teammates, and not just as members that are there to do a certain function of a task is exquisitely important. And then on the other end, being very real and vulnerable and honest with your team can go a very long way. Being willing to, in a professional manner, to let them into your world and your vulnerability, be honest about your mistakes and about things that you're struggling with, brings you to a level of conversation where everyone can be honest with each other and support one another through challenging times to sort of move forward together in a more synergistic manner.
I think the answers that Sanjay and Elizabeth have given have been fantastic. I think during the pandemic, it's been a little bit more challenging to do those off-site things and dinners and social events like that. So a smaller thing that I do, is start every Zoom meeting with a way to connect personally, finding out how was everybody's weekend, how was their Thanksgiving holiday. A colleague, a team member recently came back from a vacation in Paris. Tell us about that, tell us about your experiences. So it's a smaller way to connect, but still, I think helps to maintain those connections when we can't be together physically in the same space.
Perfect. Next question is, we all learn best from our mistakes. Can you cite one mistake that you made and what you learned from it?
Just one? I mean, I think we all make mistakes. And the important thing is learning from it. Sanjay mentioned something about one of the most important aspects of being a leader is listening. And some of my biggest mistakes have stemmed from not listening, from making assumptions or from telling people what to do. I have the role of speaker at the ACR right now, and I've been wondering why it's named speaker, because really all I do in this role is listen. So that's been, I think, a really important lesson for me.
Yeah, I mean, I have too many mistakes to count, so I'm not even sure where to start, because by virtue, if you haven't made a mistake, you haven't made any decisions. So, I think the hardest thing for me recently has been trying to communicate better what my expectation is without laying out the path for the person, right? Because I think the job of a leader is really not to say, this is how you do it, but this is what I want, or this is what the vision is, and let that person find their way. And then the other big mistake I make is a tendency to jump in too quickly, to let someone not find their own way, because, either frustration or impatience or whatever bad thing you want to call me, it's I jump in and want to help, when in reality, part of the journey for that person is, hey, I'm going to make 3 mistakes, but get to an answer. And now it's my answer and my solution, and I own it. And frankly, that's probably a better way than I would have given them had I drawn the path out for them, because they took that time to sort of be creative and thoughtful about it. So those would be, that's literally today. That was a lesson from today, earlier this morning. So definitely something that I'm always thinking about is, how do I give people the direction, but let them find the path?
I think I've also had more mistakes than I care to admit, but I will admit I've made a million of them. Dr. Ruth Carlos gave a lovely talk a while back about failing forward and how to take your mistakes and use them as a launch pad forward. I think a lot of my mistakes as a leader have really centered around trust. I've trusted people that I shouldn't, and I've not trusted people that I should have. And that's a learning process that you have to work through at every point of your career in terms of developing trust, developing those relationships, and understanding how to build human connections. But the most important lesson at the end of the day is never to start making decisions based in fear, and to never let those mistakes and the fear of those mistakes govern how you continue to fail forward, how you move forward, and how you make decisions. Because once you start making decisions based in fear, you're really just rooted in the past and stuck in a backwards position. So all 4 of us will continue to make mistakes over the course of our career. But the most important thing is that we learn from each one, that we fail forward, and we never let our decision making be governed in fear.
And Jen, I'll just add one more thing, which is I think so many of our jobs, I think there's the long-term thinking, the strategic thinking, right? The stuff we talk about. And then there's the reality of every one of our jobs, which is, okay, part of my day is I put out fires, right? And there's a fire that comes up and I've got to go fix it. And that's not what I planned on. And I would say the easiest way I know I've made mistakes, especially as a new chairman, which was to react, right? If you react quickly to a situation, you didn't actually, it goes back to the listening, but it also has to do a little bit with the patience and I'm not going to assume I know the answer and I'm not going to jump right in, because I will tell you that very many of the earliest mistakes was I came to a conclusion way too quickly. And the reality was there are many sides to every story. You got to listen, you got to actually go and ask the questions. You got to find all the stakeholders, figure it out, and you'll get to a better spot. But first few times you're so eager to just put out the fire and move on, or just put out the fire because you got something done for the day that you forget to do it right. So that would be my other piece.
Any other comments? All right, our next question is pearls and pitfalls in leading the department as a junior chair. Do any of you have any suggestions?
Well, I was a couple of years out from fellowship when I took over. So I had a lot of people reporting to me who were quite a bit sort of more senior tenured. My biggest pieces of advice are what I just said, right? So listen, be more mature than your years when you're dealing with the crises. I think it's definitely treating everybody with a ton of respect, like recognizing what you do know and what you don't know. I think any chairman, you are good at, hopefully you're good at your job as being an administrator, but you're not going to be the best radiologist at every subspecialty in your department, right? You've got to recognize that everybody in your group is bringing a lot to the table, and they're great individual contributors or great researchers, great whatever they do. So treat them with the respect that they deserve and listen and understand, and make sure that you're really balancing all of the stakeholder pieces. Because I think that bought me some credibility with folks who said, well, what the heck are you doing as my boss, right? I mean, you're as old as my kid, you're as old as whatever. And it changed over time when it came to let's have a real conversation about this. I'm here to do my job, but I'm here to empower you to do your job better. And so how can I be helpful to you rather than how can I be your boss? So those are some of the words that I would use, as explicitly as that, to just sort of take that off the table and try to move on as a relatively junior chair at the time.
I would say the most important thing as a young leader for myself is to surround yourself with awesome people, right? No leadership opportunity, whether you're a junior or a senior, should be gone at alone. And you really need a fantastic dynamic team that wants to win together as a team, that wants to see each other grow, that wants to build each other up, that wants to support each other through the challenges. Right before this lecture, I was on with an awesome group of leaders at Radiology Partners, really thinking about brand and different challenges surrounding that. And it was very clear that none of us were going at our leadership alone, but we were really there to synergistically help each other through those challenges. And I think the number one key to success in any leadership position is who your team is and who you're working with to sort of tackle the challenges together.
Any other comments?
I would just maybe add something that Sanjay mentioned during his talk, and that's make sure that you have that board of advisors that you can go to when you need advice, right? Remember, none of us does anything alone. And it's not just the people on the team that we're leading, but it's the people that we can turn to when we need help as well. And recognizing when you need that, when you need advice, when you need a sounding board, and not being afraid to reach out and ask for that.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments? Okay, I think we have time for one final question. So this question is, any leadership skills that you recommend needed when emerging from a major disruption such as COVID?
I think you need to have really good outlets for frustration and anything that you're dealing with. I think everyone needs some sort of hobby, some sort of outlet, some sort of work-life balance that no matter how busy your life gets, you do not let go of. No matter how many things you're taking on your plate, no matter how disruptive whatever you're dealing with is, every one of us needs some kind of outlet. That's a hobby that's not work related, that they can just run away to, recenter, and then come back. For me, that's martial arts. For different people, that's different things. But maintaining that habit and not letting go of it, no matter how crazy busy your life gets, I think is really critical to surviving a disruptive period during someone's leadership tenure.
Any other
Yeah.
comments?
Oh, sorry. I mean, I totally agree with that. I was going to say sort of figuring out how to roll with the punches. Mine is not nearly as active as martial arts. I'm not in front of the TV kind of guy, but absolutely agree with that in terms of, recognizing that it will get better, right? There are going to be sleepless nights, and then there's going to be other days that are going to be amazing, but try to keep the long game in mind, right? So pandemic is a disruption. There are pieces that are probably going to persist for quite a while, but there is a long game here for all of us. And the goal of leadership is not to chart the course for the next day, but to chart the course for much longer, recognizing that there's going to be other obstacles get thrown at us in the interim. But I agree with what was just said, which is, roll with the punches.
I would just add, maintain a positive attitude, really bring your optimism as a leader. I think you really want to paint an optimistic future. We will get through this, and it will be a better future once we get through. And I think just, really maintaining that attitude and setting that kind of an example for your team and the group that you lead.
Any other comments? All right, so we're just a little bit past the hour, and we do want to be respectful of everyone's time this evening. So we're going to go ahead and end the Q&A session. I'm now going to turn things over to Dr. Pyatt to conclude the webinar. Dr. Pyatt.
What a wonderful program this evening. I really appreciate all of the advice and experience and comments. Elizabeth, Amy, and Sanjay, thank you. This is a super fine program this evening. So to the audience, we would like to thank you for attending, and we would ask for your feedback to us. So you'll be receiving a post-webinar survey, and a recording of this program this evening will be available next week. We ask you to please feel free to share this program with your colleagues and other emerging leaders and others who may benefit from this in your practice. The next Power Hour topic will be on international outreach, and this will be on Wednesday, February 23rd next year from 7 to 8 p.m. You can register for this or any other free RLI Power Hour webinar at the www.acr.org/Power Hour website. And again, thank you to our faculty for delivering such a fine program this evening. Good night, everyone.